introduce our speaker today. Dr. Jessica Lautz is Vice President of Demographics and Behavior Insights at the National Association of Realtors. The core of her research focuses on analyzing trends for both NAR members and the housing consumers. Though management of surveys, focus groups, and data analysts, she presents new and innovative ways to showcase results. In 2022, Dr. Lautz was named as RIS Media, Newsmaker and Influencer category. In 2021, Dr. Lautz was named as one of the Housing Wire Women of Influence, a list representing 100 of the most influential women in leadership in the housing industry. Can we please welcome Dr. Jessica Lautz? Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for joining this morning. I have to tell you, it's rather intimidating to see all your faces. Normally on these Zooms, everyone just turns their camera off and I'm kind of presenting to myself. So I feel like I'm really to a live audience here, which I am. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm definitely going to take questions at the end. So if you have questions as I go through, please do jot them down and we'll chat about them because I really do want to make this more interactive than perhaps a static presentation. So let's jump in. It's a very unique housing market. I've already heard in your opening remarks talking about the lack of housing inventory. That really can't be underscored enough, the lack of inventory that we currently have. On a monthly basis, we release existing home sales, and in that data, we actually say how many units are available on the market right now for sale to any consumers nationwide. And what we have consistently seen is that we keep breaking our own records and saying it's the lowest inventory since 1999 and keep saying it because it truly is. And we have a lot of home buyers who are jumping into the market and saying, let's lock in low interest rates right now before they're expected to rise. We should hear more information on that this afternoon from the Federal Reserve. And yes, rates are expected to rise. They've already beat our own forecast that we had for the year, topping what we expected that 2022 would top out at. It's very possible that we've seen and we have seen fluctuation in interest rates in the last few weeks due to the crisis in Ukraine. And, I think we just have to see what the future holds when we look at that. When we do look at the housing landscape today, what we do see is the strong demand to rush in low rates. We also know that there's a number of people today who are finally getting from their bosses that either they need to be back in the office in a hybrid setting a couple days a week, or you permanently can be remote. I suspect that there's going to be more CEOs who are going to say, oh, you now have flexibility to be remote, as they may have a hard time retaining talent, especially young talent who want the flexibility to be able to work anywhere. As long as they have broadband access, they should be allowed to work anywhere. And so we're seeing that CEOs are having a hard time. If they're going to say you have to be in the office 5 days a week, employees are going to say, nope, I'll go look for another employer who will pay me more and I can work remote. And I think that's probably what we're going to see as well. Why does that matter to home sales? Because it's all interconnected. And so if we see people are suddenly saying, oh, I don't have to work in New York City and live in New York City, I can suddenly move to another area of the state, another area of the country that's more affordable, is more attractive, is where my family is and my support system, then I'm going to move there. And so we're continuing to see that type of movement as well in the home buying market. We have an all-time low of month supply. We do know that this is not a true number, though, of month supply, because this includes pending contracts. And once a home is pending, it's really not available in the open market for home buyers today. We have seen continual year-over-year home price increases. We are expecting, Lawrence Yoon, our chief economist here at NAR, is expecting that home prices will moderate in 2022. So he's expecting a 3 to 5% increase, a more normalized pace. That being said, it's March and we're still seeing these double-digit home price increases in the market. So not necessarily happening yet, but perhaps happening soon. That's a good thing for buyers out there today. They just have to move the goalpost on a monthly basis if they're trying to jump into this home buying market and say, how much do I need to save for this down payment? Oh, suddenly it's more. I can't compete yet because interest rates have gone up. And so we're starting to see those buyers who are really squeezing and are really scrimping everywhere they can to save for that down payment and closing costs are suddenly saying, I don't know if I can do this. I'm going to have to find money somewhere else. And I'll talk about that as well. One of the other things that I think is unique about this is that we're seeing this for an extended period of time. It's all markets out there, nearly all markets, 99% of them are having these year-over-year home price growths, but they're having them over this extended period of time as well. So that's really crunching affordability of homes for home buyers. And I heard you already mention in the opening remarks, first-time home buyers, and that's very hard to compete. And I'll show you some of that data. We know that there's a lot of non-primary residence buyers out there today. We actually are recording this on a monthly basis through our Realtors Confidence Index. We actually saw a high last month. There was 22% of buyers were actually purchasing non-primary residence homes. So vacation buyers or investors out there in the market. This does not include institutional investors. And I know that's a big question out there today. Institutional investors, we are digging into this in the research group. So we're taking data that's available publicly. We're also doing a survey of members. We're going to combine that all and put it out there in a report, but we don't have it yet, but it's coming soon, promise. One of the things that's important to note when we look at non-primary residence buyers is that they're likely to pay all cash. Half of them last year paid all cash. That makes it increasingly difficult for buyers who are saving for that down payment, who are not paying all cash, and that's most of primary residence buyers are not paying cash. They're financing their home purchase. And so that makes them difficult to compete in this market. But even if we just look at primary residence buyers and we look at repeat buyers, this is the green line right here. What we see is there's an elevated share who are actually paying all cash for their home as well. Among repeat buyers buying their primary residence, that's at 17% this last year. So we know that there's a lot of money out there. The pandemic, the last 2 years has been very different for different types of people. For people who could work remotely, for people who could pop their laptop off and work from anywhere, who cut spending on very nice international vacations, and they cut spending in other areas of their life. And perhaps they're already a homeowner and they saw the wealth gains through homeownership. They're moving to more affordable markets. They can pay all cash. They can compete in that market. We constantly are looking at these big cities and seeing the migration patterns and what's been happening. And we do know that looking at more affordable areas is certainly a trend on a nationwide scale where people are saying, I don't want to live in Seattle. Let me look to Boise. Oh, that's suddenly becoming very unaffordable. What about Spokane? Oh, that's suddenly becoming very unaffordable as well. So we see these types of migration patterns that are happening as people look to where their friends and family are, but also look to more affordable areas where maybe they can get a little more square footage and a little more space, outdoor space as well. The home search has absolutely changed in the last year. You know this, you work in the market, but absolutely, we know that technology has been hand in hand with the agent for the last several years. This is not a new storyline. What is different, though, is the pace of the home buying search. So thinking about the number of weeks that home buyers are looking, but also thinking about the number of homes that they're actually viewing. So when we take a look at this data, what we can see is that the number of homes that were viewed is actually at an all-time low. It's just at 8 homes. We actually know too that at the height during the last year that 10% of home buyers actually said, you know what, I don't have to physically see this home. Either I can't get to that home before it's going to be under contract anyway, and so I'm going to have my faith in my agent to really show me that home, or I don't need to because I know what that home's going to look like. And so somehow in that process, people are not actually physically viewing that home. I think it could be driven not only by this lack of inventory, but also because of the pandemic. It's all of these reasons kind of mixed in one, but it's also the fact that people are moving longer distances. So if you look and you say, well, that's going to be a 5-hour drive. I don't know if I'm going to like it anyway. Let me ask my agent to walk through that home and FaceTime them at home, show me video. I'll also look at the video tours online. I'll look at the photos. Maybe I'll ask my agent these questions, see if we know what's behind that wall that's not shown. And people are actually doing this. So when we look at that number of 8 homes, what we know is that 5 of those were physically seen. 3 of them were not. They were just relying on technology out there today. That I think becomes very, very interesting when we look at home buyer activity. When we look at the number of weeks that that buyers are searching, it's also a crunch time frame. So it's just 8 weeks. It's not the lowest we've ever recorded, but it is quite low when we look at the data historically. Again, that has to do with the lack of inventory, but it also has to do with the technology. So if you can view more homes online, if you can quickly eliminate them and say, I don't need to see that home, then you're probably going to be looking for a shorter period. Also, you want to make that a quick search. You know your home's going to sell very quickly if you list it on the market today. And so you do need to find that home very quickly to be able to move into as well. All right, I want to talk about everyone's favorite topic, maybe not everyone's favorite topic. It's a little tongue in cheek here, but millennials. I know we're sick of hearing about them, but it's really important when we talk about the home buying market today. So let me dive in and show you why I think it's important and why we should pay attention to this for the next couple of years at least. When we look at the general population in the US today, and I'm showing you everyone in the US, so little babies who were born in the last year, pandemic babies in the green, and with mortality rates, we can see the gray, it's sticking down here. As people age, you see smaller numbers of older adults in the US hitting 100, centenarians out there. Smack dab in the middle of this chart, we are looking at the blue here. We're focusing on that for now. And what we can see is this millennial generation. The big takeaways that you can have very quickly from viewing this chart is that this is a large generation. It spans all the way from young 20s, 22 years old, all the way up to 41 years old. So that's a big span in itself. We also can see very quickly from this chart that there's more of them than any other generation that I'm showing you today. So it's a very large generation. It spans a very wide range. It's a very diverse generation in their wants, their needs, etc. What is also important here? What is this red bar? That is the median age of a first-time home buyer. It's 33 years old. So your immediate takeaway in looking at this chart, as you can see, is that right behind that, those 26-year-olds all the way to 32-year-olds, that is the biggest population in the US right now. They're aging into their first-time home buyer age group. So that's what becomes very important when we look at this and why millennials are talked about a lot right now in the housing industry. Crunching this inventory really becoming an issue is because you have this confluence of factors. You have a lot of young adults who are trying to enter homeownership at the exact same time. We don't have inventory because we've been underbuilding for such a long period of time. We're missing about 6.5 million units in the US for these households that want to actually establish their own household and have household formation out there today. So we really are missing them in this housing market. This is a pretty boring chart, but I do have a couple of takeaways here. One, the blue, that's the boring part. It's the median age of a first-time home buyer. It's remained very flat in the history of our data set for the last 40 years. We see it ranges between 28 and 33. So all of those young adults are trying to get there into home ownership. The more interesting figure here, and what is also crunching inventory, is this green. And what you're seeing on this green is the median age for a repeat buyer. It used to be 36 years old. Now it's 56 years old. Big takeaway there. One, people are living longer. They're working longer. They're feeling confident to buy a primary residence later in life. It may even be a family home where they have kids up to the age of 18, kids over the age of 18, etc. They're planning on living there for a longer period of time. Tenure in home has increased for everyone, but we especially see that people are saying, if I buy a home at 56, maybe this is where I stay for a pretty long period of time. And so that's going to crunch the inventory even more, as we know that people are buying single family homes. And that's an interesting scenario where we have first-time home buyers wanting that single family home and a buyer over the age of 56 years old buying a primary residence as well, as opposed to thinking about down the line, a few years down the line, maybe I'll just buy a retirement home, go into a retirement community and an active seniors community. This is a very, very different scenario than what we have seen for past generations at this exact same age. When we look at first-time home buyers overall, what we can see is there's a slight uptick last year. When we look at primary residence buyers, what's important to note is a couple of things. One, it's a big generation that's coming into the first-time home buyer age. So of course, you're going to see a quick uptick. The other big thing to note here is that we do see a larger share of first-time home buyers who have family help. So mom and dad helping junior out, enter homeownership with down payment assistance, that's going to really be a big nudge and a big push to help them overcome those rising prices and allow them to enter into homeownership. That 50% mark, that was the first-time homebuyer tax credit. It did push a lot of first-time homebuyers into the market, but we have not seen first-time homebuyers at the historic norm of 40% since that time period. So we really are quite under that. The 30% mark, we had double-digit interest rates. We're in the midst of a recession, very different environment from what we see today. I do want to show you a chart. We hear a lot about this avocado toast. I think this is a dated reference at this point. I hope it is at least, but we hear a lot about that, about just younger generations wasting their money on things that if they just saved their money and they didn't go out to eat and they didn't waste all their money on clothes, maybe they'd have enough to buy a house. I have to tell you, it's all bogus. So what I'm showing you on this chart is data from the BLS, and it looks at consumer spending. And what I'm showing you is an apples to apples comparison. Is essentially when younger millennials were the exact same age as younger boomers, what do they spend money on? And what we can see is the whole back in your day, I walked 6 miles up a hill in the snowstorm. It's just not true. So what we're seeing here is that for younger millennials today, they're spending a disproportionate amount on housing. They're also spending a disproportionate amount on education. So it's a different spending. What we actually see is the cars and things like that and clothing. What we saw is that younger boomers actually spent more money on that than what we see for younger millennials today. So maybe more willing to use mom and dad's car, more willing to use a car share service, things along those lines, public transportation, so not spending that money. But housing is incredibly expensive today, whether it's rising rents, rising home prices. It's very difficult for younger adults today in comparison to back in my day. That's just not true. All right. We do see a large share of young adults living at home. I think this is an important thing to note, is that during the pandemic, we actually saw the largest share of young adults at home than we have seen historically going back to 1960. It's as far back as this data set goes from the census. So back in the 1960s, 1970s, we saw 9%, 8% of young adults living at home. Today, in the last year, we saw nearly 18% of young adults at home. This year, it went down to 17%. I'm going to say there's good to this. And the reason why I'm going to say this is because it allows that young adult to get their financial house in order. Perhaps there's a lot of scenarios in this. One, you could see a young adult going to school online, and maybe that means that they're not living in an expensive college town where they don't have to have their own apartment. You could also see in this scenario that a young adult did lose their job in the last couple of years. We saw a lot of job losses were actually had for service workers. That's where you actually do see a lot of young adults in the service sector. The other thing that could have happened as well is that young adults said, you know what, why am I paying really expensive rent when I can go back to my childhood bedroom, pay down my debt, save for a down payment? Why I think this did happen, why I know it happened actually, is that what we can see here is an elevated share of first-time home buyers moving directly from their family member's home into homeownership. We also know that 38% of student loan debt holders did say the pandemic got them ahead on their student loan debt. It is one of the biggest debts that is in America today, outside of mortgage debt. It is the biggest debt. And so if that allowed them to really get ahead of that, that's a good thing. What we do see is a disproportionate share of millennials are holding that debt. And so that can be one of those huge holders to homeownership. But 21% of first-time home buyers move directly from their family member's home into homeownership. We ask a follow-up question, did you pay rent to your parents here? What we see is that about half of them did. It's probably not market value. We're not talking about a single bedroom apartment with a nice balcony and such that you could have. It's just not the same thing if you're living in your childhood bedroom. So I suspect they're not paying market value rent. It allows them to save for a down payment. My little sister, she did the same thing during the pandemic. She moved in with me before the pandemic. She wanted to pay down her debt. She paid off her student loans. She paid off her car. And then she saved a lot for a down payment on her house. The week of Thanksgiving, she was a single female first-time home buyer. I could not be more proud of her. She lives 3 blocks away. She goes grocery shopping in my refrigerator. That's here nor there. It's a good thing for her. I'm very excited for her, and she's already building that housing wealth and really having those wealth gains through homeownership. I do want to talk about student loan debt. I did allude to this a little bit already, but I do think it's important to talk about when we talk about especially this young generation who's aging into homeownership. What we do see is that student loan debt is one of those big debts that's holding them back. It is the biggest debt that's holding them back, in fact. We have asked questions about headship rates here, the ability to move out of your family member's home. Are you delayed after graduation? For Gen Zers, for millennials, they are very likely to have been delayed in comparison to Gen Xers out there. We also see a disproportionate share of minorities are delayed in moving out of their family member's home. We know that there is more student loan debt that is held by minority borrowers as well, and they have a harder time paying off this debt 4 years after graduation in comparison to their white graduates. And so if you just look at apples to apples comparison, it is harder for minorities to be able to pay down and pay off the student loan debt. We also know the ability to enter into homeownership. Half of non-owners saying that student loan debt delayed them from purchasing a home. This rises to 60% for millennials. Importantly, it rises to 60% for those who are making over $100,000. Why is this important? Because someone who's making over $100,000 is probably more in line. It is closer in reach. It should be closer in reach to be able to purchase a home. But they're saying that because of the student loan debt, it's having a harder impact for them to actually enter homeownership. For those who are making under $50,000, maybe they're saying, I just don't even have an emergency savings account. How can I think about saving for a down payment, purchasing a home at all? I do want to throw out this misconception on down payments. This is a big one out there today. Please help me dispel this myth. You probably know this. You probably have worked with clients who are really not sure what the typical down payment is. Please help get the word out. When we ask consumers, what do you think the typical down payment is? 35% think they need 16 to 20% down. 10% actually think they need more than 20% down for a down payment. That is not true at all. You know it, I know it, but let's help tell consumers the word. When we look at first-time home buyers, what we see is that the typical down payment for a first-time home buyer was 6 to 7% in the last few years. It stayed relatively flat. It's never reached 16%. It's never reached 20%. The highest it's ever been is 10% in 1989. That is a very long time ago. It just hasn't reached that high. Even for repeat buyers out there, we see the typical down payment is just 17%. We know that you have to find your down payment from a number of different sources, and we're seeing first-time home buyers diversify where they're getting their down payment from, whether that's mom and dad, whether that's savings, whether that's taking from stocks or 401k loan. It's really pulling wherever they can, tax refunds, anywhere, gifts, to be able to pull that down payment together. And that's something that's happening today. I'm in the DC office today at NAR, and there is a firehouse right across the street. So sorry about that. All right, so let me talk about some of the demographic changes that we've seen as well in the last year that I think are pretty interesting ones to track. One of them is multi-generational buying. We do see that it is back down to the historic norm of 11%. Right when the pandemic started, what we saw is that it jumped up to 15%. 1 in 6 buyers purchasing a multi-generational home, saying, I need a place for an elderly adult relative. That was the #1 priority, to bring them into my home, keep them safe from COVID, make sure that they are A-okay. Also, for parents, a helping hand. We know that childcare was incredibly difficult in the last 2 years. Schools going online, going virtual, going some hybrid setting, that makes working really, really hard for parents. And so having this ability to have an elderly relative in the house, extra set of hands for young children, especially important. But we do see it's back down to 11% today. There is a baby bust that continues in this country. We are at a 100-year low for birth rates in the US today. It's true for every race. It's true for every age group. Again, working parents, it's really hard. So it's hard to imagine adding another child in. And again, the pandemic was very different for different folks out there. So for those who financially had hours cut or wages cut, or women who had to come home and have caregiving responsibilities, it's hard to imagine adding another child into that mix. What we do see is this impacts home buying. So when we look at this chart, what I'm showing you is that in 1985, 58% of home buyers had a child under the age of 18 in their home. Today, it's just 31% of home buyers. So that's going to change a few factors. One, it's going to change the size of the home that's needed, that extra bedroom. Maybe it's a home office, but it's not a child's bedroom. The other thing it's going to change is location. That perfect A+ school district, not necessarily a top priority anymore. If you don't have a child and have no expectation of having one, then you can suddenly go to overlooked areas, maybe more affordable areas. That's definitely a plus. It's also going to impact the number of moves. So if you add another child into the home, you need to move to be able to accommodate if you don't have enough space. Or if you're an empty nester, suddenly you don't have to be in that A+ school district and you can move to a place that maybe you want to be more than where you are currently. So that's going to change that as well. And those types of things are all impacted by birth rates. The other big change that we are seeing is just looking at marriage rates today. What we do see is that back in the 1960s, 70% of American adults were married. Today, just half of American adults are married. First-time homebuyers completely mirroring this trend. So back in the 1980s, 75% of first-time homebuyers were married. Today, just half are. Where we see the growth, where we see homebuyers rising, unmarried couples for one. So maybe they'll get married in the future, maybe they won't, but they're making this financial investment for themselves as a couple. The other rising share is single females. Single women are really killing it in the housing market. What we see is that they are buying homes on a lower household income. They're making more financial sacrifices to enter homeownership, and they want to do this. They're excited about the investment for their future. They think their home is a good financial investment, and they're willing to make those sacrifices to enter homeownership. I think this is a very interesting share to watch, as we do see that single woman is competing against married couples, competing against those all cash buyers, competing against non-primary residence buyers who have the ability to really put in a strong contract, but she is really out there and she's buying homes. And so I think that's a really very cool trend to watch. Agent use, incredibly trusted. Where does the agent fit into all of this with all these demographic and economic trends that we're seeing? I think it's really important to look at how this has changed and shifted, and it's for the positive. When we look at buyer use of agents, it's at 87% today. It's near an all-time high. A lot of the trends that I pulled out, a lot of the demographics and the segments that we talked about here, young millennials, single females, two of those segments who are using buyers agents at higher rates than other folks. The market is really complicated. It's a very complex transaction today. People want an agent to help them navigate that transaction, but they also want help in negotiating, making sure they have a strong offer in comparison to other folks out there, making sure they understand all the terms. Then there's so many terms out there as they go through that buyer transaction, and understanding, okay, this is a home, it's ready, let's go view this, and let's put a very strong contract in and make sure that we're that winning bid, we're that winning contract. When we look at sellers' use of agents, what we see is that 90% of sellers use an agent last year, incredibly strong as well. What we do ask is a follow-up question here, and we ask, do you want an agent that just lists on the MLS, an agent who does an ad hoc list of services, you pick and choose, or someone who provides that broad range of service? We've asked this question for about a decade. What we see today is it's actually near a historic high. Last year it was at a historic high, this year near a historic high, where people want a broad range of services. They want someone who's going to work with them well before that home is listed. Tell me how to fix up this home for sale, all the way through that transaction past that closing table. And what we know is that it's very important for sellers to find someone who's going to price that home competitively. You don't want to lose money on that home. Find that qualified buyer. You don't want that transaction to fall through. Sell within that specific time frame. You got to get to that perfect school district or the perfect commute that you want to be in, or close to friends and family, whatever the reasons are. And that's what people really do want from their agent today. There's also a lot of binging of HGTV that's gone on in the last couple of years. And especially for younger sellers, first-time sellers that are out there, they want help staging. They understand the importance of these photos and these virtual tours and videos and everything like that. And they understand their place really has to stand up and make sure that it looks nice. And so that's becoming increasingly more important to look to their agent to tell them, how in the world do I fix up my home for sale? I can see the flaws. Tell me how I can fix this up to make sure that it really does stand out against other homes that are out there as well. iBuyers, it's at a statistical zero. We honestly, in the last 2 years, it's been at 0%, which is not a real percent. It's less than 1% of sellers who are using that, who are going on to buy a new home. FSBOs for sale by owner, it's at 7%. That is a historic low. We do not see that people want to sell their home via FSBO. It's a very complex transaction. They don't know how to price their home and they don't want to lose out on that. We do know among FSBO sellers, half of them are selling to someone they know already. So a relative, they haven't agreed on price. It's not in the open market. It's just they're going to the attorney table and really signing over that house to a relative. So not a true FSBO sale. So that's all I have for prepared remarks, but I am happy to answer any questions that you may have as they came up. So I will stop sharing my screen. If you're not following us on social, though, I do encourage you to follow. We have a number of researchers and economists who are putting out new information on a daily basis. I know everyone's waiting patiently on the Federal Reserve this afternoon. I am sure we will have a blog post or instant reaction out this afternoon that discusses the meaning of that, what that means for real estate. But that's just kind of one of the things that we'll be doing every month when the job report comes out. Following us along for all of our releases and reports. Some of those things don't make it into big press releases, but it's incredibly interesting analysis, and we posted it on our blog and then on social media as well. So please do follow along. Thank you.
I am not seeing any questions yet. Does anyone have a question? You go ahead and put it in the chat.
Dr. Lautz, this is Nancy Quigg, and it was a fabulous presentation that you were giving us and filled with a lot of information. I have a question or two. Do you find that some of the cash buyers are refinancing after they purchase their home? Do you see any trend in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't have hard data on that, but we know that's something that's going on. They're either refinancing or perhaps they're using some sort of technology service. So it's not a true all cash buyer. Maybe they're working through someone, even through their brokerage, that's helping them be able to finance that home almost on the back end. So that absolutely is happening, but those businesses have popped up, that technology service has popped up to make it a more competitive offer.
And I know you would have, Doctor, the slides on your presentation that you would be able to make available to us.
Yep, absolutely. I will PDF and send them over. Yep.
That sounds terrific. I also have another question. Do you find, is anyone in your arena trying to find out how we can increase inventory by possibly getting involved in affordable housing? I keep asking developers and some legislators why we cannot convert some buildings into condominiums that could be affordable, or build condominiums. I know you're not in New York State. We have a big waiting time when our whole packet gets to the Attorney General. It's very hard to do something like that in the New York area. But I'm wondering if federal government can get involved in that, where you retrofit, or you imagine if we had something, a condominium in buildings that were maybe 150 or 180, how that would open up the market to so many first-time buyers and maybe the FHA buyer. So I just wondered if you could sort of shed any light on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I cited one of the numbers. We have done a number of reports this year on the supply crisis, but then also looking at retrofitting buildings. So maybe that is a vacant building right now. Maybe it's a hotel or a motel. or office properties into residential units. We even did case studies on looking at vacant malls. I know that that's an issue as well, where a lot of communities have vacant malls. Why are they not residential units? In some areas of the country, they have done that. So I would encourage checking out on our website. The biggest thing that I think you can bring, well, one is your voice to your local community, and really advocate for that. The other thing is to bring the data to show them, look, this community did this. This is very similar to what we have. My husband's from the Albany area, and I know there are some vacant malls up there. So looking at, and if they're not vacant, then maybe they should be, looking at how they can be better used for those properties. So I think that there are ways that we can look at this. I also have a friend in Buffalo, New York, who talks about just these buildings are beautiful. They're brick buildings, but they need to be able to be retrofitted, and cash needs to be able to be put into that to be able to look at that. 10% of members have worked on projects like that, repurposing buildings. So they're out there. Members are doing this, but you have to advocate in your local communities to get this done.
Thank you. Christine, I'm going to give this to you because I see there's a few questions.
Yeah, so the first question I have is, how is the rising interest rates going to impact the influx of foreclosures hitting the market?
Yeah, so rising rates probably won't impact foreclosures necessarily. What we would actually see, and what we have seen, is that there's a lot of people who did take advantage of the forbearance program in the last couple of years. Maybe they had hours cut. Maybe we saw a lot of women leave the workforce. In fact, women left the workforce. Labor participation for women was the lowest rate since 1984. Because women had to go home. They had caregiving responsibilities, or they worked in a sector where it just didn't make sense anymore for them to be going into the office. Maybe that's a dentist's office, or maybe that's being a teacher right now could be incredibly difficult. So we saw women leave, and that has really impacted families' finances, and people took advantage of forbearance programs. During that process, though, home prices kept going up. They kept earning equity in their home. So what we have seen is that we haven't seen an increase in foreclosures, distressed sales, like was expected. And I think the reason why is because people have a lot of equity in their home. So we may see more properties come into the market as people say, oh, I have this equity. I can't make sense of keeping this home. Maybe I should move. So we could see that come in. We kept expecting that. We haven't quite seen that yet, though our expectation was there. For rising rates, what it'll impact is likely, especially first-time home buyers, to be able to purchase a home. That being said, everything that I'm hearing, and we'll know more this afternoon, is that it would be a small rise in rates. An incremental rise. We're not talking about huge jumps. And if it is that's a cute pug. If we see a rise in rates, then it is going to impact, especially those first-time home buyers, those who are really trying to stretch into homeownership. Those are the ones that it's going to impact.
What do you see happening in the Airbnb market?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So we're seeing all of these investors, people who are saying, okay, so I'm going to purchase this second property. It's going to be a vacation home, also an investment, and I'm going to Airbnb this property. We used to, back in the day, several years ago, do this vacation investment report. We can't do it anymore. The big question that we would have from the report, number one question, how do you intend on using this property? Is it a vacation home, an investment property, or a primary residence? That's it. There was too much overlap because people are even Airbnb their primary residence at this point. It's definitely an influx in the market. There's been a number of academic research reports on this. I think it's an interesting phenomenon. We don't have a stance on it, but I do think it's very interesting how people are being their own entrepreneurs and renting it out, like they might rent out and use their car as an Uber.
Next question is, will you expect first home buyers fall off and unable to meet the criteria when we may see this to become a housing market crisis?
Yeah, I think a couple of things with that. I don't necessarily know that we're going to have this. We do have a supply crisis. Absolutely. We have an affordability crisis. Absolutely. I do think that first-time home buyers are going to have a lot of pressure entering into this home buying market unless they have mom and dad's help or they're high income earners. And that's who we've already seen for the last couple of years entering the market. They either have mom and dad's help, which more than a quarter of first-time home buyers did, or they lived at mom and dad's house, so they saved up a boatload of money and then they moved into homeownership, or they earn a lot of money. So maybe it's 2 income earners who are first-time home buyers as a married couple. That's a different type of first-time home buyer than your traditional first-time home buyer out there. So I'm talking about 3 very unique scenarios. Maybe it's all in one though. Maybe a married couple moves to their parents' basement together. But I think people who are first-time home buyers really have to look at state and local programs if they're trying to enter, especially teachers and single workers out there, and see what your state and local programs offer. Many of those programs are completely underutilized and could be available out there too.